We learn about money a lot of the same ways we learn about sex. The grown-ups tell us a couple of really important things to avoid.
Welcome to Talking About Kids. I am your host, R. Bradley Snyder, researcher, activist, and author of The 5 Simple Truths of Raising Kids. Darla Bishop likes to talk about a family's relationship with money, like money is a person. But the more I listened to her and thought about it, the more I recognized the parallels. A negative relationship with money, like negative interpersonal relationships, creates anxiety and fear. But a positive relationship is associated with health and longevity. In this episode, Darla and I discuss this and her ideas for improving kids' relationships with money. Talking About Kids is sponsored in part by the Arizona Department of Health Services Must Stop Bullying campaign through its Title V Maternal and Child Health Program. For more information, go to muststopbullying.org. If you think the information in this episode might help somebody you know improve a kid's relationship with money, well, then please like this episode and then share it with your friends and colleagues. And now, the interview.
I think back to when I was a teenager and the family was going through all of these weird hardships. And I remember distinctly thinking to myself, I don't think I dared to say it out loud, man, if we just had more money, we wouldn't be going through half of this stuff. And so once I got to college off of a scholarship and a prayer, not because I wasn't smart, to be clear, but because it was a bit of a Herculean effort to make sure I could pay the application fees and would we be able to afford it and could I even come up with the money to save my spot once I was admitted to say yes, I will be there in September. I saw that the other 17 and 18-year-olds who were coming in as college freshmen had completely different relationship with money, completely different experiences with money, a completely different just way of being when it came to money.
Hmm.
And luckily, thanks to the richness of confidence that the adults around me gave me, maybe they couldn't give me things, but they built up this confidence, right? I was like, well, I'm a smart shoot. I'm probably smarter than all these people because of all the things I had to overcome and figure out to even get here with them. Let me go read some books about money. So I started reading personal finance books as a college freshman because I figured if I can figure out money by the time I leave here, then I'll be fine. I'll be fine. And so it was really just wanting to have a different life and knowing that the adults around me were actually very good with the money they had. They just didn't have enough.
Hmm. Well, I mean that's interesting to me, Darla, because when I look at your materials and the things that you've written, a couple of things jump out at me, and it's actually something that I was really interested to talk to you about. One is that you aren't just always talking about how to get more. In fact, you use the words relationship and story a lot. You talk about as you did in your own introduction, what was your relationship with money? You didn't say that you noticed that the other freshmen had more money than you do. You said they had a different relationship with it. And again, you go on and talk about your the story, your money story. And even you have a quiz that is part of your finances efforts, which is your to learn your money style. And as far as I can tell, I took the quiz myself. It is about your relationship with money. But tell me what you mean when you say your relationship with money.
And so, one of the most effective tools that I have had as someone who has coached people on money, and both informally, friends, family, my sister, right? And in more formal settings through programs and nonprofits, is I say, okay, if money was a person, how would you describe them? So kind of personifying it, are they your friend?
Mm.
Are they handsome? Are they someone you'd want to take you to lunch, right? Do they take you new places? Do they cause trouble every time they leave or come back, right? And it's one of those things where that relationship is money is a tool, but because money drives, at least in the way that we've built this society, so much of how we interact with one another in the world and our dreams and our hopes, that there is a relationship there. But the great news about any relationship, whether it's the relationship you have with money or with another person, or even with some of the institutions in our society, that you have quite a bit of control over how that relationship goes when you manage your part of it.
So explain that a little bit more. So when you say how that relationship goes, are you talking about how you feel about money when you're making the decisions?
Yeah, how you feel about money, how you talk about money, how you use money. And I want to give you a really specific example.
Yeah.
When I told you I started this journey when I was in college. So the reason it wasn't about like people had more is because we were in a lot of ways all broke college students. But my broke was different than my roommate's broke, was different
Mm.
than the kid down the hall's broke, right? We were
Right.
all broke, but it was relative to whatever our situation was before we all made it to that campus. But we were all broke. And so because of that, that how they thought about and trusted whether they were going to buy something new or used, down to our textbooks, right?
Mm.
Whether they opened the book, that took the plastic off of the book before the class started because they trusted that they were going to be in school and finish that course and be successful, right? But those all have money consequences. Whether you buy new or used books, the price could be 30% different. Whether you open the plastic before you are sure you're going to stay in the class has a financial consequence, because while it's in the plastic, you can return it and get all of your money back. Once it's opened, it's a used book, right? And so just I remember seeing my classmate, my roommate, open her books. Classes hadn't started yet, and I was kind of like, "Are you sure you want to do that?"
Mm.
Because
Right.
I knew there was a financial consequence to opening the book.
But is it so? And I think this gets into this next piece that you are a huge proponent of, and that is a better understanding of that link between money and health. And so it sounds to me that we're starting to venture into that area. So let me bring that up. So you feel strongly that we need to pay attention to this link between money and health. And again, when I look through what you've written, I see that it's more than just more money equals more health. There's a deeper connection here. Can you explain that, Darla?
Yeah, and so if you know any of the stats, and some of these make the news, right? Your zip code determines so much
Yeah.
about your health, because where we live determines whether the environment is resource rich or not. So, for instance, I live in a neighborhood where the average rent might be $2,200 for what a family of four might need. If we lived in a different part of town, our rent might be 1,500. But in my part of town, I have two fantastic libraries
Mm.
with not only books, but a podcast studio and things I can check out. I can check out a sewing machine and other tools, things that I would otherwise need to spend tens or even hundreds of dollars on for to use once or twice a year. Now I don't have to do that because I live in the part of the city that has access to this really well resourced library. Another thing that matters is the schools. Do my schools have sports and extracurricular activities? Or do I live in an area where the schools are okay, but I need to pay separately for private music lessons or to be on a private sports team so my child can get that? And so, because of where you lived is also determined by your income in most situations, how much rent you and your family can pay. That means that all those things that affect your health, how easy it is to get to a grocery store that has a lots of food variety, including healthy foods, how easy it is to get physical activity just as part of your day. Can you walk? Can you bike? Can you get places without needing to get into a car or a bus? How's the pollution? Is there a lot of toxins in the air or in the water that could be physically making you sick? Right? All of these things are connected to where you live, and where you lived in large part is determined by how much money you're have coming into your life.
Well, it actually gets, and maybe this gets back to one of your other points too. It can sometimes be a little bit more insidious than that because it isn't just your income, but it might be how much money you have access to because of your credit rating. It might be, what sort of guarantees you can provide, which is wealth, which is different than income, right? So we know that there's tremendous disparities in the interest rates that people are charged in this country that seems to be independent of income, but has everything to do with that previous relationship.
Back to when I was a teenager and the family was going through all of these weird hardships. And I remember distinctly thinking to myself, I don't think I dared to say it out loud, man, if we just had more money, we wouldn't be going through half of this stuff. And so once I got to college off of a scholarship and a prayer, not because I wasn't smart, to be clear, but because
Yeah.
it was a bit of a Herculean effort to make sure I could pay the application fees and would we be able to afford it and could I even come up with the money to save my
Mm.
spot or to go to New York City with the Spanish club, right? That was my first time ever on a plane
Yeah.
ride when I was 17. My kids who are 5 and 7 go on a plane 10 to 12 times a year. And so for them, that is their baseline. So when they're a grown up, if they are not on a plane at least 10 to 12 times a year, they're
Yeah.
going to be like, man, I must be doing life wrong. It's just that they're in a completely different space. And so the fact that we judge people on their previous experiences, especially if they've gotten something that helps change their trajectory, like education or a new social network or a new environment, it's insidious, like you said.
Part of the problem I have to imagine, and again, maybe speaking too much from my own experience, is that if you see money as this thing that creates stress, because you've seen it in your own history, you've seen it in your family history, you might be you might have the inclination to try to avoid it. I don't like talking about it. Even in that little exercise that you said, you ask people to personify money. And the first thought that came to my head was it's somebody I don't want to hang out with. Right. And so how do you help people recognize that this thing that maybe is causing them anxiety, has caused them anxiety, has caused stress in their livelihood, that it's something that you need to pay attention to so that it doesn't do that anymore. Which is kind of, I mean, again, it's like your own health. We know those people that don't pay attention to their health because they're afraid of what it might mean. How do you get them to change their mind about the relationship with money?
The hack that I like to use for this is actually changing how they talk, how they speak about money.
Okay.
And so it's almost like getting in your brain takes a bit more work, but shifting how you talk can give you a bit of a shortcut. Because one of the things I might ask is, what are some of the first rules you got about money as a kid? We all had rules about
Mm,
money, right? Like maybe a grandparent gave us money, maybe we found money, maybe we had a lemonade stand. So there were always usually some rules or guidelines about how we were supposed to use the money. And so are those rules showing up for you now as an adult? And a lot of times they are. They look a little bit different, but it's that same core rule. The other thing is, what are some of the things that the adults around you said about money? They might not have said it to you, but maybe you heard them say it.
right.
How did they talk about it? When you asked for something, whether it was a special trip to a certain drive-through or a treat or to pay for something that you needed for your sport or your activity, what was their response? Was it more often than not, no, we don't have money for that, stop asking? Or was it like, let's check it out, or let me talk with dad, or let me talk with mom? Because those things also drive how you think about money and therefore how you feel about money. And so, one of the ways, especially when I'm talking to parents who are like, I wonder how my kids feel about this stuff, because we kind
Mm,
of talk about it around them, but not necessarily to them. I say, well, here's what you do, don't change anything, although we talked about it, so you're going to change anything. But for the next month, which I know is a long time, but for the next month, open a note in your phone because we always have our phones on us, and every time you hear yourself or your partner or another adult in the house say something about money, just make a quick note in your phone. If you hear your kids talking about money, make a note in your phone. And then after that first week, just see what it says. And think about, is that the voice that I want in my kid's head? Is that the voice I want in my own
Mm,
head about money? And then the next week, see if it's similar, if you're getting different messages. Because what we forget as parents, especially if we're kind of parenting those teenagers already, is, that we really are the voice in their head, even if they don't act like it. And so, how we talk about things, how we explain things, how we listen to their questions and their concerns shapes that inner monologue in their brain, if they have one. Some of us psychologically don't get the inner monologue, but most of us do.
right. Well, and this goes to this issue of how our relationship with money as adults impacts the kids in our lives. And like, what have you seen in your work about how the relationship that an adult has is impacting their kids?
And so it's in those tiny moments that we brush off but add up over time. So in the store, we're here for trash bags and light bulbs, but of course, in the checkout line, there's candy and somehow little toys
Yeah.
and comic books. And so how that interaction goes matters, right? If you shoo the kid away, you shut the kid up. If you say, "We're no, not right now. Stop asking for stuff. We're already running late for practice," right? Which is a totally
Mhm.
normal response because you probably are running late for practice for the third time this week.
Right.
But if you don't pick up the garbage bags, right? But if you could take the beat and say, so what, show me what you were looking at again. Oh, you want that bubble gum? Did you bring any money from your piggy bank? You didn't. Okay, well, we can't get it today, but how much does it cost? It costs 69 cents. All right, do you think you have that in your piggy bank? Because if you do, after practice, if you have enough in your piggy bank, you can give it to me. And the next time we're here, I'll either get you that bubble gum while we're together, or if I come to the store by myself, I'll use your money and I buy it for you. And it's one of those things that took an additional 90 seconds, but it's a
Yeah.
completely different interaction around how we use money, and that we need to have a piggy bank, and that if we saved money for things, we can get them versus stop asking, we're late.
And it's not a no either, right? It's not the hard no. It's not the lecture on, do you know what gum used to cost when I was a kid? It's not any of that. So, wow, no, I like that. I like that a lot. So the there's kind of two things that are going on in that interaction. One is you're trying to get the adults to have a better relationship with the money.
Mhm.
And you're also in that interaction that you just described, trying to make, again, what you call money smart kids. So am I correct, Darla, in asserting that there are two things that have to happen? One is you have to have a decent relationship with money yourself before you can make these money smart kids.
Not before, during. The cool thing about
Okay.
having kids is you end up
All right.
learning all types of things anew or even for the first time. And we see this in public health. So taking for example, we just lived all of us who are here still listening to this lived through a pandemic, right? And
Yeah.
so what that means is that all those lessons that our kids and even we got about hand washing, around covering and cleaning and sanitizing, if they learned it at daycare, at school, my 5-year-old is very good at enforcing rules around hand washing, right? What order we're
Mm,
supposed to do in, you didn't sing the song, you didn't dry your hands properly. And so we've seen this over and over again with tobacco prevention, with railroad
yep.
safety, with drug prevention, which although the data is mixed about how effective DARE was at preventing drug use versus exposing to drug options, but we see this over and over again that when kids learn lessons about health, safety, and hygiene, they bring those lessons home to their adults and they make grandma put on her seatbelt every single time before she drives the car away. They make mom wash her hands every single time after she sneezes. So the kids actually end up being the carriers of these new behaviors. So they reinforce it for you. So if you never learned it, if your kid learns it, they'll help you. Well, mom, remember, every time we get $1, we have to save part of it. Oh, right. I did teach you that. Dang, now I got to do it. Mom, remember that if you want that big thing, we got to save for it. Oh, right. I did teach you that. Dang it. Right. And so you end up learning and reinforcing together because you taught the kid, so they help remind you over and over again whenever you stray from the rule or the system or the guideline that you've taught them.
This might be an unfair question, Darla, and I
I'm
apologize if
ready.
it is. But, when I heard the examples that you gave, the seatbelt example in particular, it seems like there's a lot of public health messages that weren't uh, people aren't actively trying to counteract. But with money, there is. There is always somebody that's trying to get you to spend. There's always somebody that's trying to get you to fake it before you make it. Right. So it's not like there's commercials and podcasts and TikTok videos of people whipping off their seatbelts and saying, my life is so great because I'm not wearing a seatbelt. But there is around spending. It's funny. It is some of the most obscene videos I've ever seen are the way that people just, I'm going to McDonald's and I'm going to spend 10 grand. Let me see if I can do that. So our children in particular are bombarded with disrespectful depictions of money. So how do you counteract that? And again, it's like I said, I recognize that this is a really difficult question.
No, I'm so glad you asked this. We're actually starting to see this. There was a change in the federal administration in the US. And so we're seeing some big shifts in vaccines, right? Whether vaccines are
Right.
considered safe and effective, whether we should have them, whether children should have them, whether people should be able to make
Right.
choices, right? Even though the data tells us that for the past 50 years, we have saved lives, we have saved people from being injured and lose the use of their limbs, right? Like we're now fighting against people actively saying vaccines are bad and dangerous. We're like, wait, but the data says the opposite. So in money, the messages are far more frequent and stronger and more
Mhm.
fun and more sexy, right? Because using money and spending money is way more fun than like going for a run or drinking water instead of soda, right? And so the way to
Right.
combat it is like you've got to have the conversations early and often about what is real and what's pretend. Now, the good thing is
Yeah.
kids kind of know that if you help them spot it because if you're reading books to them, if you're watching television, if you're watching cartoons, they ask all the time, "Well, can you really fly?" And you can say, "Well, no, that's just pretend. That's in that cartoon or that's in that book." Right. And so helping to kind of identify what's real about money, like, hey, see how we live in the house? The way that we live in this house is because mom and dad or aunt and uncle or whoever the grown-ups are, we go and work, we trade our time and the things we know, and we help people, and they give us money. And then we use that money to buy our food. We use that money to pay our rent. We use that money to make sure that you have the things that you need. And even if it's not a rosy picture and things aren't all the needs aren't met, by putting in that reality in a age and stage appropriate way early and often and pointing out the things that are real and pretend, that can make a big difference and make those kids who then become teenagers who are spending more time away from you and making choices about what's important, what's valuable, how they spend the money that they might have access to. They're rooted in all those micro conversations you had when they were younger.
Well, and the whole time you're saying that too, I can't help but think about, what emotional dysregulation does to us.
Mhm.
And part of what emotional dysregulation does, as you know, and as longtime listeners of the Talking About Kid podcast know we've addressed many times, is it compromises your ability to understand the consequences. And what it sounds like, what I know you're advocating for, Darla, what I advocate for is helping kids understand the consequences of their spending, but it can be so
It's
hard
so
in
hard.
that moment,
Yeah. It's one
right?
of those things that you have to do it, unfortunately, in the moment, which isn't always ideal because 'cause they're, like, having the tantrum because you wouldn't get them the gum. So you're like, "Well, I
Yeah,
gotta calm the kid down and make it out of the store with the items we came for because I've been trying to get these items all week," right? So you're also regulating
yeah,
yourself while trying to co-regulate your child, while also managing your feelings of possible embarrassment because our town's not this big, and if people think I don't have control over my kids, like, what does that mean? But also like I need them to have the lesson, but not right now. So then how do I revisit when we're calmer? How do I revisit in a store that's less triggering for them? Like maybe if we go to the hardware store, they won't find things as attractive. And so I'll try this lesson again in that setting. Or when there's a bake sale or a popcorn sale at school, this is an opportunity to have that conversation like, oh, well, how many dollars do you want to take? How much does that buy you? How are you going to replace the money once you spend it? right? That it's like you just got to keep doing it over and over again, especially when they're young and they believe you a lot more than they don't.
Well, I think it you happen upon my own kid's, superpower, which is there isn't a store on the planet that I've been able to go into with her where she hasn't said, "Oh, this is what I always wanted." We're in a t
That's good.
we're in a tire store. I don't know how you could have always wanted white walls, but I'm so glad that this is the thing you can't live without right now.
Yeah, and I know I
So
make it sound easy, but it's one of those things
mm,
where it's the more you do it, the easier and more natural it becomes, right? Like at first, it's gonna feel clunky and maybe even weird. And my parents never
yeah,
talked to me about this stuff, but that's the only way to shift, to break, to change the way things
yeah,
are going to go is you got to be a little uncomfortable with it. And then it gets a little, we learn about money. Your audience will appreciate that. I've listened to a couple of your episodes. We learn about money a lot of the same ways we learn about sex. The grown-ups tell
mm,
us a couple of really important things to avoid.
mhm,
Boys
mm,
only want one thing, don't go out here and get
right,
pregnant. Um, but then they kind of leave the rest for us to figure out. Same with money. Don't go running up credit cards. That's how you ruin, or no, don't go open credit cards. That's how you ruin your credit. Well, opening isn't
right,
the problem. There's a few other steps to that. Or, some good messages too, like always save for a rainy day. Okay, but what counts as a rainy day? How much am I supposed to save? Am I supposed to
right,
save every day? Where it's like we get a
right.
couple of one-liner rules or guidelines and then got to figure the rest out from our peers, from the internet. And so leave less space for the peers and the internet in all the different ways because just about everything we do has a time or a money consequence. And so you can turn into that and you will be the parent who's talking about money all the time. But boy, you'll also be the parent who maybe your kid retire you because you've been talking to them about money since they were little.
Well, and we need to change some things, Darla. We need to change, like, for example, we need to change how banks are set up, right? If they like, how many other places in the world, and I'm talking specifically about my neighborhood here, in New York City, like you have to get buzzed in to go into the bank, and then you're talking to somebody behind 3 inches of plexiglass, and these are not necessarily safe environments. They're environments that you go in and you feel like you're being accused of things, and yet having that, a good relationship with the bank is important into your own financial security. So there's some things we need to change. Like we don't have banks like welcoming us in the same way that, I don't, the boutique that wants to take our money for the knickknack welcomes us in,
Yeah, and
right?
I think that's
So
it's
that is changing.
yeah, and so as the adults, whenever possible, showing your kids other parts of your city or your state of the
Mm,
world also matters because I grew up in a neighborhood like that where all the banks you had to be buzzed in or you had to walk into a door and then that door behind you had to close, then you could go into the next door. A lot like a prison.
yeah.
Don't ask me why
Yep.
I know about going to a prison. That's a different podcast episode. Um, but when we would go 3 miles up the streets, past Eight
Yeah.
Mile, the
Yeah.
same bank, so the same company, right? The same, but a different branch, just 3 miles. So like a 10-minute drive. The lighting was brighter, no plexiglass. You walk right in, and they say, "Well, welcome. Are you here for a banker or do you need a teller?" And so while it gave a sense of unfairness, it also gave me a sense of like, oh, things are different here than they are in my neighborhood. And that's important for kids to know. So whenever it's possible to try to take your kids to different places and to expose them to different, even just different neighborhoods, whether it's because you have a friend who lives over there, you have some business to take care of, and involve kids in the business of your life, because then that's how they learn is by watching you do stuff.
So I know that a lot of the examples you provided, really impact parents and how they interact with their kids, but a lot of the listeners to talking about kids are teachers or they're direct service providers. And of course, we also know that that other adult in the life of a kid is really important. So, for those people who are in that role, either they're a mentor or they're a teacher or they're a coach or they're working in that after school program, what are some things that those individuals can start to do? I know it might not be within their purview, but I suspect that you believe that that doesn't mean that they can't have an impact.
And they are having the impact, right? Because we're
Yeah.
seeing our teachers, depending on how your family is set up, for more hours, especially on the weekday, than we're seeing our parents. And so it's one of those things where teaching and showing and giving different examples, but always presenting it as, now, if your family or your house or your community does it a little bit differently, that's okay. There's a lot of
Mm.
ways to get it right. Because I think one of the most important things that not enough people know is that there are a lot of ways to reach a goal. There are a lot of ways to get money right. So that if your mom and dad do it this way, or if you're living with your grandma and this is how your grandma does it, but me as a teacher, this is how I do it. We might all be doing it right for our situation. And so collect these examples and remember that there's a lot of ways to get it right. There isn't just one way to get money right, to get your education right, to get your career right. There's a lot of ways to get it right. So collect examples from a lot of people and take the ones that work really good for you.
That being said, are there some things that you see people get wrong all the time?
Yeah, mistakes that people make over and over again, especially if they, and this is a real consequence of poverty, and I had to really work against this one, is
Mhm.
like knowing that the money's going to disappear faster than it needs to, and so you kind of
Mm,
send it away fast because you're like, well,
yeah,
at least if I get a little of enjoyment from this windfall, if I get a little enjoyment from my paycheck, then when it all disappears, I'll at least have gotten some enjoyment, even if we couldn't pay all the bills, even if we couldn't buy all the groceries, because we weren't going to be able to do that anyway, right? And so,
yeah,
not recognizing that feast and starve habits is actually can sometimes bring the starve on more quickly. But that's such a hard thing to break if you know you're in a feast starve cycle. The misconception that you need a lot of money to have a good life or to improve your situation, I think is what's tough. And part of it is if you've also been in a resource poor or resource stretched environment,
yeah,
you don't see the possibilities the same way. Like I'm a military spouse. It didn't hadn't come up yet, but have seen military spouses with really limited financial means get very creative about how to lean on the community so that they could
mhm,
get what they need if they didn't have the money. So mom A has 3 kids, mom B has 3 kids. Neither of them have money for a babysitter. So they trade. One day a week, the mom has all 6 kids for 2 or 3 hours. Another day of that same week, the other mom takes all 6 kids. And what that does is that gives that mom just a little bit of wiggle room to finish a project, to go to the grocery store, shoot, to shower on her own and drink a hot
right,
cup of coffee without kids climbing on her. And after a few weeks of leaning on that community, that mom then gets a little bit of energy back. She then gets, some ideas about what ways she could clean up the house or sell something
yeah,
or do a craft, right? And so, what are some non money ways that you could use the people around you and work together to free up space? Is it that you carpool so that you spend less money on gas? Is it that you figure out who works in the same building with you and you take turns bringing lunch for one another? Right? Like, what are other ways that you can lean on community so that if spending is part of the problem because there's not enough money coming in, maybe you can shift some of that spending. But
well,
it's hard to be creative when you're broke.
it is, but, like, in everything you just said too, I'm sitting here thinking about all of the building blocks of resilience. So in the examples you gave, you're strengthening your community, which in and of itself strengthens the individuals in the community, their own health and mental health. We know that meals that people prepare themselves have better nutritional value than meals that they buy on average,
Mhm.
right? Than when they go to the store. That's important. So in all of your examples, there also seems to be this inertia. The hard part is getting money smartness started. But it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there is an inertia that it seems like the benefits accrue and it gets easier.
Yes, and I like to call it the life spiral. We've all heard of the death spiral. This is gonna go
Right.
wrong, then this is gonna go wrong, then this is gonna go wrong. It's kind of a life spiral where it's like, okay, if I start in this direction, and then I add this one thing, and then I add another thing, the cumulative impact and shift over time and that's the power, it's compounding interest just in food and in wellness and in laughter. So it
Yeah.
all compounds just like interest does, which compound interest in a bank account is great. Compound interest on a credit
Yeah.
card is not so great. So let's get you on a life spiral.
Well, Dara, I want to thank you so much for everything that you've done to help create money smart kids. And thank you for being a guest on Talking About Kids.
Thank you for having me. We covered a lot of ground. I hope this serves your audience well.
That was Darla Bishop. More information about Darla is at talkingaboutkids.com. And when you do visit talkingaboutkids.com, leave me a note. I would love to hear from you. The Talking About Kids theme song is by the Senators. For more of their music, go to thesenatorsmusic.com. And remember, kids are young goats and young humans, and the difference is that young goats are easier to manage.